And my name's Steve Del Bianco. I'm President and CEO of NetChoice, and on the board here at the Internet Education Net Caucus. I am so honored and pleased that we have today for a fireside chat the Deputy Secretary of the Department of Labor, Keith Sonderling. And by way of introduction, how many of you were here 2 years ago today for State of the Net 2024? Oh, excellent. If you were here then, you know that what we had from Deputy Secretary Sonderling was a discussion of his time at the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the EEOC, where President Trump had appointed him in 2019. And there, almost all of the focus was on AI, which is a little bit scary that you knew at the time that AI was going to be so important. On both counts, both in terms of State of the Net and in terms of the Trump administration, you met the ultimate bar. You did such a great job that we both invited you back.
All right.
Invited you back here.
Put that on my resume.
And President
Second
Trump
time.
puts you right back into the cabinet in the second administration. One critical through line in your service to this country in the administration has been your focus on AI and workforce. The Deputy Secretary's highest priority at the EEOC was finding a critical balance in today's rapidly evolving job market for AI while adhering to established civil rights protections. 2 years ago, this was your call. And then now at DOJ, you're leading, actually, on implementing the president's AI action plan in terms of helping our nation's workforce thrive in an environment of AI. So explain how it is you saw this coming around the corner, that you knew AI back in 2019-20 was going to be as big as it is now.
Well, if I knew that it was going to be this big and I had a crystal ball, I wouldn't be here. I'd be on a yacht somewhere. But, when I got to the EEOC early on in my time at the Department of Labor, too, during the first Trump administration, I was really just trying to be forward-looking and seeing what the trends are, where the workplace is going. And at the time, a lot of that, this was 2019, 2020, early 2021, before where we are now. And I started hearing from a lot of the big corporations, from general counsel, human resource officers, of saying that their HR departments in the future are going towards artificial intelligence. And like many of you, I didn't really know what that meant. I didn't know how that was going to impact the work because I thought, okay, is that robots replacing humans? And okay, is that big enough for me to take on? Because is that really going to impact every single industry? Or is it going to impact industries prone to automation? But when I started diving into it, I realized it was so much more. I realized it was about using AI to make employment decisions, HR decisions, workplace decisions that humans were doing before. So really from the A to Z of employment, from creating a resume, from creating a job description, from creating a job advertisement, applying for a job, interviewing, going through the onboarding, salary, performance, everything related to the workplace from an HR perspective, from a day-to-day work perspective, was being impacted by AI at the time. So that's why I was like, oh, wow, it is really every industry, and it's going to impact every single worker in every industry getting into the workforce, staying in the workforce, thriving in the workforce, and eventually leaving the workforce. So when I started looking into it back in 2020, I realized, wait a minute, this is really complicated. I'm a labor and employment lawyer. I don't know how AI works. I don't know what any of this stuff is. But at the end of the day, what I realize is that the AI is just either assisting the HR departments or making that decision that humans were making. And those are the same employment decisions that have been being made since the laws that we enforce at the Department of Labor, at the EEOC, since the 1930s, 1960s for the civil rights laws govern. So I really took an approach and saying, let's look at the decision. And what are the decisions? There's only a finite amount of employment decisions: hiring, firing, wages, training, promotion, benefits, demotion, et cetera. And how is AI impacting all of that? But at the end of the day, there's going to be a decision, and we have a clear framework within the law that those AI vendors, that those AI tools need to comply with, just like as if a human was making that decision. That's really what I spoke about during my time at the EEOC, really simplifying it so workers understand that when you're in the workforce, here's the technology that is going to be making these decisions about your employment, not necessarily new novel decisions that have never been made before, but the same decisions that you've been subject to since the beginning of having a workforce. And also for employers, the ones who are investing in this, the ones who have the market power to be able to go to vendors and say, create this AI tool for me in this part of my workforce that they understand the long-standing laws, employment laws that apply to each one of those decisions, to have them being built into those programs. So I like to say the whole ecosystem of AI, especially when it relates to the workforce, is you have the VC money that wants to invest, and they don't want to create a product that's going to discriminate or not do what it's supposed to. You have the entrepreneurs who want to solve a problem within the HR system. And then you have the buyers in the middle who have that buying power, and they don't want to buy a product that's going to harm their workers. And ultimately, you have the consumers, which in my space is workers and applicants too. So you had to look at the whole chain, and that's what I was able to really focus on before this current job.
Well, those workers and applicants could take some comfort, and the employers might have some concern that the employers are liable for the decisions they make, no matter what tool they use. It could have been that they used AI, could have used Microsoft Excel or the darkness of their own soul, but if they had bias, discrimination, and fraud or other kind of abusive behavior, it always has been prosecutable under civil rights at the state and federal level.
And that's not to pick on employers, because if you think about it, Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, where you look at the Fair Labor Standards Act, the National Labor Relations Act, I can go through the 180 employment laws out there. At the end of the day, only the employer can make a decision, right? Because you're still applying for that company. You're still getting either hired or rejected or fired from that company. Whether or not there's an AI tool in there injecting bias or otherwise in there, that tool is not your employer. That tool is not the one ultimately bringing you in or escorting you out of the workplace. So that was really important to keep in mind, and why it was so important for these employers to work with the vendors, to be a part of that design process to make sure that all laws are being respected and the tools are actually doing what they're supposed to do in a real live work situation. Because ultimately, you don't get a job from an employer. It's that employer you have to claim, not tools potentially running in the background.
And then broader context then at the Department of Labor, where you're Deputy Secretary. Looking at this technological shift of AI, our economy has endured many technological shifts in the past and found ways to thrive after the technology's been digested. But what makes this different? Is AI particularly bigger threat than other technologies we've seen before?
Well, now, since those discussions early on when I first started diving into this, now with generative AI and really everyone being able to use and understand it, the equation is much different. And in the Trump administration, through the executive orders, through the AI action plan, all which we're talking about right now, the focus is on making sure that the American worker is prepared for this AI revolution that we're going through and has the underlying requisite skills to be able to use these tools, to be able to thrive in the workforce and have complete job satisfaction while their employer can actually use these tools for the gain. So we want it to be a win-win for all the different parties. And how do we do that? We have to start fresh. We have to start with AI literacy. And that's what we're really focused on. But before we get to AI literacy, I know we're going to get into it, I want to talk about a second very critical component to all of this for the Department of Labor as outlined in the AI action plan. And you've talked about it at this conference, you hear about it, is that infrastructure. And what we're seeing with the president's trade deals, historic investment into the United States. That's going to bring back not just manufacturing, but all different types of areas. But what we're really seeing too is with the AI infrastructure needed, which is a lot more than I do, but the most important thing we can do at the Department of Labor, because we know the money's coming in, we know there's a desire to build not only these centers to house these tools, is to make sure that we have American workers who are trained, ready to get the job. And the whole life cycle there is, how does it start? Investments come in, construction. We need to be able to build these facilities. And at the Department of Labor, we're really trying to make sure that we have the HVAC, we have the plumbers, we have the skilled technicians. And a big part of that, what we're trying to do is through registered apprenticeships, which have worked for a very long time, which is the fastest way to get in skilled trades, which is, there's a lot of studies on the amount of money these jobs are, but we don't have that skilled training.
What role does Department of Labor and the federal government play at the certification of apprenticeship programs? Are they entirely private?
No, they are through us. The registered apprenticeships are through the Department of Labor. What we're trying to do is be as flexible as possible as these new jobs come. We're trying to change the incentive structures to get more companies to actually engage with us and do formal registered apprenticeships. So we have those life cycles of jobs. So for the construction jobs, and then also too, what people aren't thinking about, because when you hear about apprenticeships, you start, oh, these are skilled trades. So these are people who are going to build the buildings, the data centers, get them operational, and then walk away. And what does that employer then going to do to fill the rest of these high-skilled, high-tech jobs? And we want to continue the apprenticeship chain down the line there to have those tech companies think about what the trades have been doing, the building trades have been doing successfully, is getting now apprenticeships in the tech world. And this is a huge initiative of ours at the Department of Labor, is opening up the aperture of what you think of apprenticeships. And if we can do that, then we will be able to have the employer industry-led training programs on those exact facilities, create the curriculum, work with us, get the manpower from local high schools, from some of those areas, especially in trade schools, but in some of these rural areas where we're seeing these facilities being built, work in advance with the state workforce agencies that the Department of Labor's funds to tie some of that money to what the local jobs are. A lot of the workforce development in this area has been traditionally on, here are the programs, here are the curriculums that we're going to offer. You lose your job, unemployment insurance, or coming out of high school, but tying those into actual AI infrastructure jobs and AI jobs, working with these companies, we really want these jobs to go locally into these areas where these are being built. And that's really talking to industry and seeing what those jobs are. Because if you think about it, when you're building these centers, when you're staffing them with jobs, the company knows where those jobs are down the line. Not just when they make the announcement. You can look 3-4 years down the road and say, here, when we hit these different stages, these are the types of workers we're going to need. But without us knowing that, we can't then talk to our state workforce agencies, work on that curriculum and the agenda to make sure that they have the workforce there with the proper training. So that's really the way we're looking at it. It's twofold. It's one, yes, we want the traditional trades. We want to build these things, but then we want apprentices to operate them as well. We want to give those to people who are desire to work in them too, that may not have the same background or the same training otherwise that these jobs have historically gone.
Yeah, I think it's a great distinction you drew between the trades, the construction trades that build the data center, and the other kind of apprenticeship programs for those who operate. I mean, electricians, we're 30,000 electricians short in this country to build what we need to build to drive AI in our economy, stock market, and beat China. And when it comes to that, those electricians might spend years in an apprenticeship. But when AWS, Amazon, finishes one of the data centers out near Dulles, the people that they bring in to operate the data center, they can get trained in a 12 to 16 week apprenticeship, paid apprenticeship. And these are high school and trade school grads averaging 6 figures to operate a data center.
And that skill stays with them, just like a degree. And these are really tailored trade apprenticeships where these for where jobs are going. And the portability of that, I think, is a really important part as well as these data centers are being built across the country, as tech companies are looking into that AI infrastructure, to have that mobility, to have those skills is something we're really excited about.
We have a flat workforce in this country. We don't even have a growing population at this point, but there's still anxiety on the part of workers about job turnover. Now, your own Department of Labor puts out statistics, and for over 20 years, we've averaged destroying 5 million jobs every month in our economy, but creating 5.1 million jobs. And that dynamism is why we have been able to endure multiple technological trends without actually having reduced employment. But do you think that things will be different with AI, and will AI enable companies to be profitable enough that they can actually hire more people?
There's so much doom and gloom when it comes to how many jobs are going to be lost by AI. And that's really what drives headlines. It drives sales, it drives consultants to look at the workforce. But what that really does is it instills fear in employers and workers. And that's what we're really excited about at the Department of Labor, to come in and saying, we are the Department of Labor. We are going to be looking at this for the benefit of the American worker. And what is the reality here when it comes to job loss? And what we're studying and what we believe, instead of the fear that you're just going to completely lose your job, parts of your job will change. But that's going to be a good thing. And if the employees understand what the AI is doing, why their employers are buying it, why their employers want to implement it, then they will have that baseline knowledge of how to use it and how it's going to change their jobs. So we're not looking at it saying it's going to wipe out jobs completely. Jobs are going to change. The job descriptions, your daily job use will certainly change, but we want to be there to be able to skill and reskill the workers on how that is going to impact their current job, how they're going to be able to do the different parts of their new job description where there's less repetitive work. And you all know this is a sophisticated crowd on what that actually looks like and how these AI tools are augmenting rather than displacing. But to the extent there is job displacement, that's back on the Department of Labor. And that's why we're being so aggressive in ensuring that baseline AI literacy is out there, not just for the next generation of workers, but for the current generation of workers, those who want to re-enter the workforce, who've been out of the workforce, have those baseline AI literacy skills. And that's what we're really starting to tie some of our federal apprenticeship spending and other spending that the Department of Labor does through our state workforce agencies and even discretionary grants, and saying, what is the AI literacy piece to this grant? So you have everything from shipbuilding, everything's gonna be impacted by AI, healthcare, et cetera, go through the list. Well, the Department of Labor is gonna be asking, in this training, how are you looking to where AI is going to change a specific industry, and how are you going to actually start that training now?
I was at the White House when your boss talked about awarding bonus points to grant applications if they had that AI awareness.
Right.
And I also heard Secretary of Education, Agriculture, and others. And I'm thinking now about your emphasis on the workforce is appropriate, but what can you do at Labor to help with people that are below the workforce, high school students?
This is the really exciting part. And this is where the president's executive order on not only the high-skilled apprenticeships that I talked about briefly, which requires the Department of Labor to get to 1 million registered apprenticeships, but also on AI literacy. And this is one of the most exciting executive orders that the Department of Labor is a part of, because it really addresses the systemic issue that we're talking about with the current generation of workers, that they just weren't raised on this technology. They weren't raised using AI. And if you look at countries like China and India, where they have that AI literacy component going back to the 2nd or 3rd grade, how are we going to do that? And why it's exciting that the Department of Labor is a part of this with the Department of Education is that our stakeholders are businesses, employers, unions, workers. So we're having those conversations with industry saying, here's where we want our workforce to go. Here's where we expect the changes to be with the impact of technology. Here is the skills needed to be able to either create this new technology or operate this new technology or just do your job with this new technology being considered. And our partnership with the Department of Education, where in another executive order on the Department of Education, is actually moving a lot of those programs, whether it's continuing educations, whether it's certain pre-K through 12 programs, community colleges, adult training, to the Department of Labor, so then we can work with our stakeholders to see where those jobs are going and then inject that downwards in the pre-K through 12 system to start that AI literacy early, just to get into high schools, to say in a high school in this area, these are the jobs that's going to be coming that we can see, that we're forecasting, that we're talking to employers with, and get that training. One of my favorite examples is with a lot of the energy infrastructure being invested in the United States, or some of the battery plants coming over here through some of the foreign investments. These are going to rural areas. Talking to them, we could start getting that curriculum in high school so students can start learning some of these baseline skills on battery engineering or certain AI technology, have that so then they can, at 18 years old, get a high-paying job locally and still have that, whether it's through a registered apprenticeship or otherwise, get that out there too. So a big part of this is that baseline literacy. And let me tell you the most important part for me on this and what I've seen in my time in this. So much of the fear in the workplace around AI is what? This AI is going to take my job. This is going to be my AI robot replacement. And you wouldn't feel that way if you understood the basics of the technology. You wouldn't feel that way if you had these baseline AI skills where you could say, like, okay, well, there isn't actually a technology that exists that can actually fully replace my job. Instead, I understand that my employer is using this, or I'm helping them develop this to take this part of the job, to automate it, to make it easier, so then we can
make you more productive.
Make you more productive, have more of that human interaction. There's a lot of very simple examples we've seen in healthcare about transcribing, and you can spend more time with the patients. But that is an easier to understand area. But when you start getting into the knowledge worker jobs, where so much of it is data driven to begin with, seeing what AI is going to do, what it's not going to do, and that's how it's going to help you, is a part of the equation we want to be a part of. But you can't understand that if you don't understand the basics of the technology. And that's what we're trying to do, not just in the pre-K through 12 system, but for current employers. And for those who have lost their job or want to get into this part of the workforce, you think about, you lose your job, you go to a state workforce agency, get unemployment insurance, but we want that training you get when you're getting that UI money. Normally, you have to take some generic courses to show you're still looking in the workforce. What about designing those courses now with that AI hook in there, saying, here are the AI jobs, or here are the jobs available in your area, and here's how AI is going to impact them, and we're going to teach you those specific skills. So that's really what we're trying to do on the education side. But it's not just for the current workforce. It's really looking downstream into the future workforce.
Yeah, and I truly appreciate that national perspective and trying to lead from your office at the Department of Labor. And we'll open it up for a question or two in a minute, but I have a tough question for you, because the national initiative can run headlong into a patchwork of state laws. We had 1,100 last year that were proposed. There's 1,800 proposed as of today, according to Adam Thier. 1,800 laws at the state level that seek to regulate the technology as opposed to just the harms. As just the harms. And as an expert in employment law, I would point you to the law in Colorado, which takes effect in July. And the law in Colorado would make it a crime if AI generated a response that had a disparate impact on a protected class if it were a consequential decision in their life. Losing a job, getting promoted, consequential decisions. And you said earlier that existing state and federal law already protect workers from bad decisions that are made, bias, discrimination, fraud, and abuse. So do you need to regulate what comes out of the machine, or do you just regulate the conduct of the employers?
Well, to your point on the state and local laws, the administration has been very clear. The president's executive order on this speaks for itself, which I fully support. But this goes back to what I was saying earlier, and sort of what I came to the conclusion on is that we should just always, whether it's in the employment context, whether it's in the credit context, whether it's the housing context, any of these insurance, any of these that impact your livelihood, your ability to thrive in society, and really look at the outcome and how did we get there. Yeah. And what you may find is using AI, it may be much more transparent than what we've been stuck with, which I know you like hearing me talk about. When you talk about the black box of an algorithm, we can't figure out the decisions it's been making. Well, in the employment context, we've been dealing with the black box of the human brain since the beginning of time. And very rarely do people tell you, did you discriminate against someone? Did you not hire this? Did you not pay them right wages? Nobody says yes. So in that sense, using algorithms that are clearly designed in accordance with our longstanding laws, which is on us, the Department of Labor, to have all those guidelines out there to say how health and safety laws are impacted by new technology, how wage and hour laws, how the Family Medical Leave Act may be issued with a automated scheduling tool, and saying that using this in a transparent and clear way, we now have more data points than we've ever had on an employment decision being made versus somebody's brain. And that's what we're excited about. But that's on us to give those guidelines and those parameters to everybody in the life cycle, from the investors to the developers to the users, and then ultimately the worker.
And if you discover in this process that there are gaps in state and federal laws that would protect people from harm, we should fill those gaps with laws that don't necessarily regulate the AI that was used, but regulate the decisions that harm people.
Or come to the Department of Labor for guidance using a lot of our longstanding tools, whether it's opinion letters or otherwise, which the Congress authorized us by statute to issue that interim guidance and saying, here's a gap we see, here's how programs are now impacting this area of employment law. What is the Department of Labor's position on that? And we have statutory authority to answer those questions with modern technology, and that's what I'm excited about.
All right, time for one question. Do I see a hand up anywhere? Go ahead, please.
Thank you. Jessica Dine at the Open Technology Institute at New America. So you touched on this, but could you please talk more about how I guess the administration is looking at instilling baseline AI literacy skills? Because you've got the workforce, like the AI workforce component, and then you've got the workforce component in terms of upskilling workers to accommodate AI in their jobs. But then there's this underlying need for very basic AI skills, both K through 12, and then adults who are out of the educational system but still don't have these basic skills. Other side of it I'm curious about is whether you're pursuing any kind of framework or system of measurement, because even on the digital skills side, we're not tracking that stuff. Curious if AI is going to be
That's a great question on both. Let me start at the last question, is that we are starting to track it. We're trying to be more transparent than ever in the billions of dollars we're giving out to workforce development. So on our website, we have a much more transparent tool. You can see where the money's going, but actually tying it to that AI literacy and what does that mean to your first question. That's really what we're excited about. If you read our talent plan for the golden age that we did with commerce and education and labor, we talk about what that actually means and what these baseline AI literacy skills are and who's going to actually help us create that curriculum. And we found that it really needs to be industry-led, because with the pace that these tools are being developed and being used, we really need to rely on industry to tell us exactly what those specific frameworks are for the baseline AI literacy, just to understand everything that we could put in elementary schools through community colleges. I want to go for a second career, which much more relevant to what you've already learned. So a lot of that is in our American Talent Plan that talks about the AI literacy component on it, but we believe that we do need industry's help in creating that curriculum, because before, when it's called the train and pray method, where the Department of Labor gives a lot of money out on training that may have been good in the 1960s, 1970s, you keep going on, but you don't know if that's actually going to be skills they need when they go to apply the job versus industry, working with industry on the front end. So we have about a 20, 30 page document I'll make sure to circulate that we go into this in depth, and that's with commerce and with education, so we're not doing it alone.
That's fantastic. Hey, I want you all to join me at thanking.
Thank you. Thank you.
Join me in thanking Deputy Secretary of Labor, Keith Sonderling.